I, Dr. Jinu, on behalf of Tata Memorial Hospital and NAG Foundation, welcome you all for the seventh year in review in breast cancer. It's a privilege and honor for me to be the host for the day. We believe that such diverse and dynamic group of speakers and panelists will provide in-depth insights to the attendees on the newfangled research in the management of breast cancer. With no further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Sudip Gupta sir, who is a director at ACTEC, professor of medical oncology at Tata Memorial Center, Mumbai. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jainam. On behalf of my co-chair or the co-organizer, Dr. Shona Nag, and myself, I welcome you all to the last day of the Year in Review Breast Cancer 2022. Today, we have a series of panel discussions on the abstracts that have been presented in the preceding 5 days. And we have very eminent moderators and panelists to call out what can be distilled in terms of practice from these abstracts. We also have 3 very eminent international faculty who will give state of the science talks during the day. And we will round it off towards the end with a little light-hearted did you know from yours truly here. So let me begin by inviting our chairpersons. I'm grateful to both of you, Dr. Tejinder Kataria, who's chairperson, Department of Radiation Oncology at the Medanta Cancer Institute in Gurugram, and Dr. Buddhi Singh Yadav, professor, Department of Radiotherapy and Oncology at the prestigious Postgraduate Institute in Chandigarh. So over to you, Doctors Kataria and Yadav, to take the proceedings forward. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for inviting me and Dr. Buddhi Singh Yadav to this discussion today afternoon. And I would like to invite Dr. Geeta Kadyaparat, who is the moderator. She's the Senior Director, Breast Surgical Oncology at Max Healthcare, Patparganj and Vaishali, New Delhi, with a huge experience behind her to moderate the panel discussion on key abstracts in the loco-regional breast cancer.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind invite. And without much ado, I think I just introduce you to my panelists. So my panelists are a very experienced bunch of surgical oncologists and radiation oncologists, and those are the kind of abstracts we will be discussing during the course of this discussion. Dr. Kanchan Kaur, she's a director of breast oncosurgery at Medicity, Gurugram. Dr. Anupam Mane, consultant breast surgeon from Pune. Dr. Deepak Jha, senior consultant breast surgeon at Artemis. Dr. Vedant Kabra, head of department surgical oncology at, now he's at Fortis Hospitals, FMRI, Gurgaon. Dr. Prasanjit Chatterjee, senior consultant radiation oncology at Apollo, Kolkata. Dr. Shalakha Joshi is there as well. She's a professor and consultant surgical oncologist, breast DMG at Tata Memorial Hospital. Dr. Vikram Maya, radiation oncologist at Aster Hospital, Bangalore. And Dr. Monica Malik, who's the professor and head of Department of Radiation Oncology at Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences. So I've been given the onerous task of actually trying to bring to you a whole lot of abstracts, on 16 abstracts, but let me just, I will try and put across to you those abstracts which will possibly influence our practice in the near future, if not exactly on a Monday. Okay, so let me just start off, let us not play surgeon and radiation oncologist, and let's start with radiology. And this is a very interesting abstract, but I'm sure it doesn't make too much of sense to most of us because it talks about frequency and outcomes of new suspicious lesions on breast MRI while patient is on neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So I'm not sure how many of us do this, and what they concluded from this study was they looked at 23 lesions. There were suspicious findings. All of them were labeled not more than a BI-RADS 4. And new suspicious findings were reported in 5.5% of breast MRI performed to monitor the response to the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. The interesting thing is the mean time from the baseline pre-treatment of breast MRI to the MRI with new suspicious findings was 2.9 months. So to my panel, any of you could take it. How many times would you do MRI in the interim while the patient is on neoadjuvant chemotherapy? So surgeons would be in a better position to answer this, because I'm sure you would be called upon by your medical oncologist colleague to assess response at some point of time, or possibly they do it themselves. But because we don't have a medical oncologist on the panel, how do you assess your patient's response to neoadjuvant systemic treatment? And is MRI a usual tool for assessment? When do you do it, and what is the frequency while the patient is on neoadjuvant chemotherapy? Dr. Vedant can possibly answer this question.
Yeah, so assessment of response is usually clinical, at the most by ultrasound. And if clinical response is good, we don't even ask for ultrasound usually. MRI we would hardly do, because we have already done MRI pre-chemotherapy to know the multicentricity and all those things. So we really don't do it again.
What if there is a young woman who's 35, who's got dense breasts, who's undergoing neoadjuvant chemotherapy? She's keen on breast conservation. Would you want to do MRI at the end of neoadjuvant chemotherapy before you were to offer her breast conservation for sure?
So I would actually do it before chemotherapy, definitely. And if there is a question of response, or there is a response which is not very concentric, then maybe I'll do to know. Or if there are microcalcifications there, then mammogram actually would show it much better. Or there are some things which were shown in pre-chemo MRI which I want to follow up. Otherwise, I would not do it again.
So I think, so this is just to, yes. Is there anybody?
I would agree with what Dr. Vedant is saying, and I think it's very important to understand, especially if you're talking of young women in whom neoadjuvant chemotherapy is going to be given, because that is most likely going to be the age group which will end up with NACT. I think pre-chemo complete thorough evaluation is extremely important, and most of the times clinical evaluation is sufficient. And it's very rare that at the end of chemotherapy that we would want to do an MRI. What we need to do the imaging for in most cases is to understand if the wire has to be put, whether stereotactic guidance would be needed, or is it still visible on the ultrasound, and ultrasound guided wire is going to be feasible to do. So I think that is where imaging for us plays an important role, to understand how the wire is going to be placed, and that's why that ultrasound or mammogram post completion of chemo is needed if there is complete clinical response.
Yes, because this study has actually thrown up a lot of questions rather than give any answers. In fact, nothing that they biopsied, because they landed up biopsying most of these abnormal lesions that they picked up and did not find anything in a single patient. So I'm sure Shalaka, Anupma, and Deepak would agree and not really pursue an MRI as the assessment tool. This is just to start off with something which was neutral. So now I come to, this is a very interesting paper, and this is something that will make sense to a lot of us, because we do continue to see locally advanced breast cancer in the manner that we see, and not in just terms of centimeters. So this study comes from Adyar, and the chief author is Dr. Sridevi. And the key objective of this study was to assess the real-world outcome and prognostic factors of patients with locally advanced breast cancers. So the inferences that she drew from this study, a retrospective study, of course, observing what has happened over the last over 10 years of almost 72 months of follow-up. Patients with triple-negative breast cancers had high PCR with neoadjuvant chemoradiation, something that is not done as a standard of care. Almost all of us would do neoadjuvant chemotherapy, but here they were looking at patients with neoadjuvant chemoradiation. Tumor size more than 10 centimeter had inferior survival. And of course, Dr. Sridevi said such patients should be upstaged to a T4 in the AJCC staging. And patients who were hormone receptor negative, no pathological complete response, presence of LVI, and those treated with neoadjuvant chemoradiation had poorest survival. So Although this is a treatment option in inoperable LABC, but of course this has to be looked at in the context of a clinical trial, because unless you have randomized evidence, you cannot really do it tomorrow. So if you look at this graph, I'm just putting it up to just show you that the red line that you're seeing is the neoadjuvant chemotherapy arm, and that is the neoadjuvant chemoradiation arm. And you see that the patients on neoadjuvant chemotherapy are doing better. But let me tell you that most of the patients here underwent neoadjuvant chemoradiation. That is 127 patients, while only 15 patients had neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Does this worry you? Because this could be a trend, because there has been no randomization really comparing NACR with NAC. And of course, there is no mention in this paper, and they have not looked for it also. Of course, the second primary cancers they have looked for, they found that over 2% of patients came up with the second primary. But cosmesis is something that has not been looked at, and there is no data on long-term cardiac toxicity with this approach. So, so what do you think of, I would like to ask my surgical oncology colleagues as well as my radiation colleagues as to, do they think that this is a possible method of treating patients who are really the big locally advanced breast cancers with large tumors and a lot of skin involvement, or even ulceration and bleeding?
Actually, Dr. Geeta, Dr. Sridevi, that day while she was presenting the paper herself, told that now they are using it only for those who haven't responded to neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So it is not the current standard of care in that institution. Maybe it was there earlier, but they don't practice this anymore.
Yeah, because I believe they're seeing a lot of stage 2s now, because only about 48% of their patients were really locally advanced breast cancer. And this study, they have gone back to look at the patients. And of course, with improvements in neoadjuvant chemotherapy, obviously you will end up doing something which is lesser but gives you better outcomes. So your comments on this paper, if you've been able to go through it. Dr. Anupma? So
Yeah.
have you ever used, or let me put it this way, have you ever used a neoadjuvant radiation? Put aside chemotherapy, have you had the opportunity to use neoadjuvant radiation in a patient before you landed up operating?
No. We have never come across such a situation. And all the locally advanced, whether they were the smaller ones or the huge, large ones, everybody has gone on for neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
What about you, Shalaka? Because I'm sure you see the entire spectrum. I'm sure you see as big cancers as Sridevi sees. And incidentally, we also see them sometimes. So have you had the opportunity to do a neoadjuvant chemo radiation or a sequential chemo followed by radiation before surgery?
Short answer to that is no. But little longer answer would be occasionally palliative mastectomies after they have done hemostatic RT or palliative dose of radiation to the breast to take care of local symptoms. We have resorted to doing that. The one point I had when Dr. Sridevi was also presenting a larger resection with a plastic surgical flap, either an LD or a free anterolateral thigh flap or a DF, or such options are more considered. Like we often end up doing that when it looks like a larger tumor which is not responding to chemotherapy and something which is progressed beyond your conventional margins of mastectomy. So if something is crossing midline, crossing the posterior axillary fold, inferiorly going below the IMF, superiorly reaching the clavicle, then I would consider this rather an inoperable case. And in that case, if they have tried to do radiation and bring the margins closer, and then I'm not sure of that. But no, the short answer, like I said, is we have never resorted to. We have done larger resections and put plastic surgical flaps and then instituted radiation before chemotherapy sometimes if we think that the patient has been chemo resistant to a couple of lines of neoadjuvant treatments, but not done radiation before surgery.
Dr. Prasanjit, I think you want to add something to this.
Yeah, I just thought that though I don't have any personal experience, but I know the Europeans also starting pre-op radiotherapy and they're doing a randomized trial. I believe the Germans are doing that. Now, having said that about no data in long-term cardiac toxicity, I just would like to put in a point that anyway, most of patients following surgery are getting post-op adjuvant radiotherapy. So as a radiation oncologist, I still feel can be an exciting option giving radiotherapy along with chemotherapy as a neoadjuvant setting. And I think Cancer Adia is doing a trial and they are publishing a data about their analysis of giving neoadjuvant chemo versus neoadjuvant chemo radiotherapy, the survival, primary survival, and disease-free survival. That is yet to be published, but that is on the pipeline. So that is my input so far.
Okay, so I have had the opportunity of treating one patient who was triple negative, started progressing she had a new internal mammary node after completing her neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and there was some progression in the local disease also with possibility of an impending fungation. So that's the only patient post neoadjuvant chemotherapy had radiation, and then we operated on her. Her wound held well, but besides that, triple negative young patient, she did pretty badly after about 8 months of completing her systemic treatment. In the sense, completing the surgery bit, she passed away because of disease. Okay, so let's now come to yes.
Recently we also had this kind of a dilemma whether these larger tumors like more than 10 centimeter and where we've instituted free flaps and longer surgeries and plastic reconstruction, we looked at their survival, and it's the data we are still working on, but it's around 70-80 patients, not a large number, and the progression-free survival was really 6 to 8 months, and nearly 30-40% of them had died at 1 year due to metastasis. So we wonder what is even the role of surgery in these large cases.
Because in these large cases, invariably there will be some form of dermal metastasis, and you may be thinking that you're taking margins, but just beyond your margin could be sitting another dermal infiltrate, which can actually come back to haunt you. So that
I think this is not even in with basic principle of radiation also, because if you see the basic principle of radiation is it acts best on the microscopic disease. So it is better as an adjuvant form rather than doing it for the neoadjuvant setting.
Okay, I think, because we have such brilliant neoadjuvant systemic treatment coming up, I think we're going to see lesser and lesser of the likes of you and likes of us too, because, with neoadjuvant systemic treatment comes the de-escalation for others, because, and that is what I'm going to discuss in the next few abstracts that I'm going to discuss. So I'll be talking about this SYNODA trial, which is again something like an extension of the Z11 trial. So I just want to ask you here, because the SYNODA one is again, it's a Italian trial, and they have tried to look at whether if 1 to 2 metastatic lymph nodes are present, can you just leave the axilla alone? So who amongst you uses Z11 in your common practice? So I'd like to ask the surgeons this. Do you do it? Do you not do it? Because, we have to do something different on a Monday. But do you see yourself changing practice basis the second trial, which also has similar results to what has been seen with the EcoSoc Z11?
Not yet.
I think you'll get a not yet, but we've had in the past 2-3 months, sadly, 2 patients of false negative sentinel node reported intraoperatively. And both these patients were above 70 years, postmenopausal, ERPR strong positive, kind of meeting all the criteria of the EcoSoc Z11. And we had a discussion with them and our tumor board discussion about going back to do axillary clearance versus RT and hormonal blockade. And for both of those, we actually chose not to go back to do an axillary clearance. So in the prospective setting, if I would have been told that one node is positive intraoperatively, will I not proceed to clear the axilla? That's not going to happen anytime very soon. But yes, for that rare patient in whom you're put in this kind of a situation and you have this data glaring at you, and then you think, would you really benefit from taking this a patient back to the OT for a clearance. So that was the dilemma we've had in two situations where we've had the confidence to say, no, we will not go back. But I think as of now, no, we are not following these criteria. And
Dr. Deepak Jha, your take on this?
Ma'am, I think we've been pretty resistant so far as surgeons, but sooner or later we have to change.
Yes, because there is a lot of new data emerging, and it is very encouraging data because our fear is we don't want to see that single axillary recurrence, because even a single axillary recurrence will really put you back by about 10 years, because behind by 10 years, because it's really bad when it happens. But we have to, like you said, we have to keep up with the time sometime or the other. So this is another one which is again from Memorial Sloan Kettering, and lot of confidence in this paper, although it's a very small number. And this is something that I have against the ACOSOG Z11 also. So this is 610 patients, node positive, 234 consecutive patients, and these are all clinically N0. So clinically N0 meaning just clinically N0, no radiology, no FNACs, nothing. And what they did was they treated with SLNB alone, so long as they were retrieving 3 or more negative sentinel nodes. So I think that is the kind of practice that we are all comfortable with, because I would dare to ask you, how many of you actually just take out that one sentinel lymph node and are happy?
No, actually, I think we get more than 2 to 3 sentinel nodes,
Yes.
Hardly ever one. It's always 2 or 3 or 4, or sometimes our pathologist tells us even 7 nodes have come for sentinel node biopsy.
True, because I get this very often, not very often, but with a certain pathologist that you would have sent 3 and you get about 7. So you do get that. So what about you, Vedant? Shalaka, of course, does low sample.
No, post chemo, if there were N0 pre chemo, I would definitely do SLN. But if they're node positive pre-chemo, we are not yet doing it. But this study has shown that even without clipping, they have a very good retrieval rate. This is more than 90% that they're identifying SLN, and they have a good survival. Though I think its median survival still is around 4 years, little less than 4 years. So we need a little more median follow-up. So we need a little more follow-up, but I think it has shown very nicely. The other thing which I have against clip nodes, when you clip the node, you somehow alter the architecture of the node. You may also alter the lymphatic pathways coming to it, and then you make them non-identifiable on SLN anyways.
So a lot of times clip nodes you may not retrieve in the best of hands.
Yes.
If I remember right, there is about close to 20% chances that you may not pick up that clip node at all, despite whatever you may do. But then we do have that study that is often quoted by Claude, which is the targeted axillary dissection, where the FNR becomes less than 2%, close to 2%, and that is very good. But I'm a little, concerned about this paper, because there is no FNAC prior to this thing. They just say clinically node negative, and even the assessment is purely clinical and not radiological, and that is how it is done. But anyway, like I said, this information, when it keeps coming back to us, we keep getting bombarded. I'm sure we will also change practice, but not so quickly, because we do understand their tumors are much smaller than ours.
Can I just get a quick clarity here from Dr. Vedant? He said that clipping a node alters the architecture, and
it may. I said that's my worry, that it may. And what happens is sometimes the clip is there near the hilum, so the lymphatic pathways also may get altered, and your dye or your radioactive material may not reach the node, and that is how you don't find them within the SLN territory.
That's an interesting thought. I think we need to,
anyways, we can talk about it.
Yes. Yes.
One point was that, just a couple of points was, one was the FNR of less than 10% was proven for 3 nodes or more. So that is accepted for us, that 3 is only B32 showed us that. But like how B32 randomized patients to get dissection versus not, why can't we randomize post-chemo patients who are now node negative to get the dissection versus not? And then why not have some level 1 evidence for EFS rather than relying on, these prospective, retrospective data? Because our N1 might not be exactly same as their N1. So
That's right. So our N1 could be just, borderline 3 nodes right up front. And I'm sure none of us would be prepared to leave the axilla alone if we got 3 nodes positive. Okay. So this is the other paper. Again, this is got to do with the various subtypes. 40601, CalGB 40601, which is HER2 positive, and 40603 triple negative. These are the groups that they looked at. And what they found was clinically node negative pre-treatment, the chances of a YPN0 overall is 88.8%. But when there is a PCR in the breast, there is a 96.3% chances that you will get a YPN0. If you are node N1, if you're clinically N1, YPN0 overall is 66.2, but with the breast PCR, you get a good 91.7%, which drops to a 39.7% when there is residual disease in the breast. So this is basically what they're trying to see is, what are those factors that we could possibly take into account if we were at some point to offer, sentinel node biopsy in such patients, thinking that they are actually a node negative. And if it is N2, 3, of course, it again goes pretty much similar to N1 and N2 is the YPN0 when there is residual disease, and when it is breast PCR, much better in terms of the node. So this is what you're seeing. This is the overall survival curves of patients based on breast residual disease as well as and if there is nodal residual disease YPN0. So these are all the patients, and if you can see, this is with what the blue line is when there is breast PCR, and that is YPN0, and the red line is when there is a residual disease in the breast, and there is and then it is a YP node positive. And the same you can have a look at the HER2 positive cohort and the triple negative cohort also. So basis this, how comfortable would you be omitting axilla in a CN0N1 clinically and clinically N2, 3 with a breast PCR? Would you take just that into consideration if ever you were to start doing sentinel nodes or low axillary sample in the neoadjuvant setting? I'm sure Shalaka will be able to tell us something about their current study that is happening, which is have you noticed anything to do with breast PCR in the patients that you have put through for low axillary sampling low axillary sampling post neoadjuvant chemotherapy for node positive to start with?
We haven't started the study. It's in the IC review, and fully even in the pandemic, we've not been able to start a new study which is randomized. But we looked at our axillary sterilization rates, and it was high. It was 65%, and we looked at only N1 and N2 patients. N3 we excluded because that's IMNN and supraclap. So we wanted to exclude the N3 clinical N3 ones from the entire study actually, because that would be a much worse disease stage also. But N0, N1, N1, N2, when we looked at, the overall sterilization of axilla was 65%, whereas the primary response was much less. Primary was only 25-30% depending on molecular subtype, but axillary sterilization was much higher. In HER2 positive and triple negative, it was even higher, 75% and 65% that high. ARPR positive, it was low. So patients who are becoming node negative after chemotherapy is higher. Also, what made a difference in our study was giving the entire chemotherapy first. That increased the axillary sterilization rate also. So in patients.
Okay.
The PCR in the breast will only be confirmed after surgery.
True.
So, whether there is complete PCR or whether there is PCR or not, that if we will come to know that only after surgery, our axillary management is going to happen at the time of surgery.
So basically what they're trying to do is, if this is a PCR as in, yeah, you're right. So that is something you will know only after surgery, but they're possibly trying to figure out if you were to see, there is this vacuum assisted thing also where they were doing biopsies, but unfortunately that failed quite miserably. with false negative rates of 15 to 45%. So that is why it did not take off. Otherwise, they were doing vacuum assisted biopsy from the area where the tumor was to see if there has been a pathological complete response. But that is still not validated and does not give us the kind of information that we want.
Dr. Salaka mentioned that in their series, they saw PCR more in the nodes than they did in the breast. Whereas anecdotally, I mean, we don't have our data, but anecdotally, I know that we end up seeing in a lot of more patients have breast PCR still have some residual disease in the lymph node. So, I mean, obviously, we'll have to look at our data better, but anecdotally, I don't know what the other surgeons, feel about this with their data.
So it'll be interesting to know from you what is your kind of subset division. So if you see an ER/PR positive patient vis-a-vis a triple negative and HER2 positive in terms of
I think
nodes.
that goes across all. I mean, in any case series, a triple negative or a HER2 new positive patient who is on NACT is likely to get a better response. I mean, that would be across all series studied anywhere. But what I'm saying is that anecdotally, I feel that the breast response, even when we get a PCR, we end up finding some nodes with micromets, or more disease, residual disease in the lymph node, and it doesn't always mirror what's happening in the breast.
What about you, Deepak and Anupma?
I don't agree with Kanchan actually, because I feel it's a very random way of response. Whether breast PCR is more common or nodal PCR is more common, I don't think there is anything very systematic to it, rational to it. And from my side, I would say that patients who have HER2 new positive or triple negative, who I expect will respond better after completion of all the systemic neoadjuvant systemic therapy and complete radiological evaluation, I would definitely consider them for de-escalation of axillary surgery if I'm expecting a PCR.
Yes, Dr. Prasanjit, if my radiation oncology colleagues want to chip in, please go ahead, because this is purely surgical, that's why.
Yeah, I understand. But just to give a viewpoint, the de-escalation of axillary surgery after neoadjuvant chemo requires really a careful patient selection. As we see, the prediction of nodal pathological complete. Also don't agree with Dr. Kanchan. We know that breast pathological complete response and pre-treatment nodal status, the predictive of nodal pathological complete response, that is the YPN0, it should be less than 5%, as we have data also. So coming that lymph node positivity with breast pathological complete response is something theoretical, is to my feeling. And a subgroup which is CN2 disease, that subgroup we don't have much data, and that needs to be studied a lot. In fact, that subgroup has to be evaluated separately vis-a-vis the CN1 and CN2 group. So that is a group which needs to be looked upon separately.
Absolutely, because I think if at all we'll end up doing, de-escalating in the axilla, it will happen only with the CN1. Very unlikely that we would look at CN2 until we have more data from there. So I thought somebody wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'd like to say something, Geeta, here. And
Yes,
that is for these cases, does that mean that the patients would go in for the axillary dissection as a second stage procedure? Because the breast PCR only would be commented upon after the final histopathology comes in. So you leave the axilla and then you do a second stage ALND if you have to.
I don't think that is what is implied. They're basically trying to look at breast PCR as a possible, method, a factor which can dictate what we do subsequently. But I don't think, two-stage surgeries. But we must understand they do a lot of two-stage surgery. So your sentinel node, what they do is not subjected to frozen. Sentinel node, if there are more than 3 nodes positive, they would go back and do the axillary dissection in a second setting. So they are quite comfortable doing second surgeries, unlike our settings where, getting the patient to the table once is by itself a big ask. So I think that is also one of the reasons why we are reluctant to adopt what is so easily said in the West.
Right, thank you.
So this is another paper which again not too much. This is the INSEMA. This is not a study which has been completed. So basically, there are two types of randomizations that are happening here. 5,230 patients randomized to SLNB or no SLNB in a ratio 1:4. If it is sentinel node negative or microscopic disease, you leave them alone. If positive, then you would do randomize again to in a 1:1 ratio of SLNB or completion ALND if 1 to 3 lymph nodes are involved. So that is how the randomization is happening here. And basically, to understand from you, what is your take on the arm symptoms? Because that's all that they saw in this study so far. That is all the QOL data coming out of this study is that patients in the no sentinel node had better arm symptoms as compared to those with SLNB, and those with SLNB had better arm symptoms as compared to those who underwent ALND. So what has been your experience? So surgeons again, and maybe our radiation oncologists could possibly say that yes, radiation does better in terms of arm symptoms as compared to surgery, also coming from the AMAROS trial. I just it just went out of my head. Go ahead, surgeons, and then maybe the radiation oncologists.
So Geeta, just when I read this, I was just interested to see with axillary, when you compare the group that you've done the axillary clearance versus the sentinel node, there is no doubt that the morbidity will be more in the group that has the axillary. But in patients who've had a sentinel node biopsy,
disappointed.
How often do you see long-term morbidity? If you're doing a focused sentinel node through a very small cut, some of them, yes, do end up making these small little loculated seromas, which after a few months disappear. But long-term morbidity, I don't think sentinel node biopsy alone produces to the extent.
I think this is food for thought. We need to give the answers. We can easily, I think there are so many of us doing sentinel node biopsies, time to give the answers, because I think a lot of us have been doing it for more than 15 years now. So this is the time to look at our follow-up data and see what has happened to the arm in our patients. Because, if you give me a general outlook, I would say the number of patients we used to see sitting outside the outpatients with swollen arms has really diminished over the last so many years. But that's just, eyeballing your outpatient patients. But I think we need to give a real answer to this question. And I think we should be coming up with this answer if we were to do a multi-institutional retrospective trial on this.
So Geeta, I'd just like to say something here again, because, I don't know how many times and in how many hospitals you have seen surgeons doing sentinel node biopsies. So from the surgeon who will pick just that node to the surgeon who will take out a little bulk of tissue as a sentinel node and end up taking more tissue out of the armpit. So I think that will really bias the understanding the final effects of sentinel node.
Doesn't matter. That will be the limitation of our study. If and when we come down to doing it.
Geeta, one thing I would just like to say, earlier when we started doing the sentinel node biopsies, in order not to miss out any positive node and all that, we would actually take out a little more tissue. We would like to take out like 5, 6, 7 nodes and be really extra careful about it and all, right? And now, of course, we are absolutely pinpointing the sentinel node and just picking up, kind of a cherry picking, just the node and nothing else, trying not to disturb the other tissue. So there has definitely been a difference in the arm symptoms. We can definitely see that.
Of course. And Shalaka, because you do low axillary sampling, I'm sure you also are looking at the QOL of your patients.
We do low axillary sampling, and hence the nodal yield is higher. I agree in the low axillary sampling arm, and that has been kind of the critique of the low axillary sampling procedure, although it's a more standardized procedure. And Dr. Neeta is currently randomizing, we are trying to do sentinel node biopsy versus low axillary sampling with morbidity as an endpoint, so that either we prove or refute that kind of argument. So when we are doing sentinel node, it's really 2 to 3. But my problem is that often, and when we teach sentinel node biopsy also, we say palpable nodes to be included. And I end up palpating. So what do? I palpate more nodes. So they often said blue and hot, and also palpable suspicious nodes. So there comes that surgeon's discretion. My junior surgeon would think everything is suspicious because.
So, you will learn with experience to leave those lymph nodes behind and not pick them out. So I think, I will take leave. I'm going to keep the surgeons in the background for a bit because I've kept my radiation oncology colleagues waiting for a long time. So just to, take you through this acute toxicity associated with 3 weeks compared to standard regimen for locoregional breast therapy. So I may be getting it all wrong, but that's fine. I'm sure you can correct me and you can tell me what all this is about. But what I understand is that hypofractionation has become the norm. And if you compare the adverse effects, even in this paper, I don't think they have said anything new, but I would please ask you to enlighten me on this.
Yes, so
Dr. Monica, you've been very quiet.
So hypofractionation basically is now become the standard of care for breast radiation as such, and even being used as a standard now when comparing with other fractionation schedules, at least in the data from Europe. So there are now very large trials which have shown us that 5 fractions is equivalent to 5 weeks and 3 week schedules don't really differ in terms of outcomes, but there is a definite difference in terms of toxicity. And we know this from our own clinical experience as well. Now, most centers in India have also shifted to the 3 week schedule, and we are seeing a definite reduction in the acute toxicities. The trials also show that late toxicities are not different in the 2 arms. So it's reassuring to know that as well.
So is that your experience also, Dr. Maya?
Yeah, it's in fact, the START trials have shown that acute toxicities and late toxicities are in fact better. I mean, they're much better in the hypofractionated arm rather than in the normal fractionation. So that's why the NCCN and ASTRO have put up the guidelines that it's better to go ahead with the hypofractionation for conserved breast. As of the MRM is concerned, still the NCCN says that we have to give the normal fractionation because of the other toxicity criteria. But as of hypofractionation is concerned, it is now the standard of care in, I think, in almost all the centers all over the world, in fact. So, and I've also seen that the toxicity is far better in the hypofractionated arm as compared to the normal fractionation, especially the dermatitis and the lymphedema rates also.
So your lymphedema, has any of you looked at your lymphedema rates? Because one of the primary objective of this trial is also to report on the lymphedema rates, which will take some time in coming through.
So in contemporary practice, at least, we are seeing very much lower rates of lymphedema than we used to see maybe a decade or more ago. And the reason for this is both improvements in surgery and shifting to axillary node dissection, shifting to sentinel node biopsy, as you were saying. Plus the fact that we don't irradiate the dissected part of the axilla anymore unless there are risk factors such as micrometastasis or extranodal extension in the dissected axilla, or if there is very heavy nodal burden. So all this has helped to reduce the lymphedema rates. And also to just elaborate on the previous discussion, there is a trial, the AMAROS trial, comparing axillary radiation versus axillary dissection in sentinel node biopsy patients, which has shown equivalent results and also less lymphedema with radiation.
Okay, so let me go to the next abstract. Okay, Dr. Prasanjit, you wanted to add something?
No, I think she finished it, Monica finished it rightly. We have the AMAROS data. We showed the lymphedema with radiotherapy vis-a-vis surgery is equal. In fact, with the more designed modern radiotherapy, the expected lymphedema is supposed to be much, much low when we are planning it in 3D CRT and IMRT technique than what we used to do conventionally a decade back. So I don't think that should be an objective. Of course, we have been doing hypofractionated, moderate hypofractionated from 2010 and 11. That's when it started and it got approval. Now we are talking about fast forward trial where we are seeing them finishing the radiation in a week time instead of 3 weeks also. I think the long-term data for the fast forward trial is yet to be out. So we should be a little bit cautious before we take it as a clinical practice in most of the centers, I would say.
Okay, so let me come to the
we at
next
PGI have been doing hypofractionation since many decades, around I think 5 decades now. So we have published our data with hypofractionation, and our moderate lymphedema rate in these patients is around 7 to 9% at 10 to 15 years.
Right. So let me come to the next abstract. Just quickly to ask you, do you think this polar signature is going to tell us which patients not to irradiate, or we are still stuck despite several other signatures not adding to our comfort? Dr. Monica.
So it's very difficult to put this into our practice. One thing is we don't do these signatures for our patients, these genomic signatures. The other thing is our practice does not have too many of DCIS, or although we are seeing a trend towards increase. There are 2 large trials as of now which show that there is a small but significant benefit in giving radiation after surgery in DCIS. So we don't really know which is that small subgroup which does benefit. And then there is obviously an overdiagnosis and overtreatment going on with these patients when we are diagnosing these in situ carcinomas. So it would definitely be very helpful to know which patients are the ones who are going to benefit with the therapies and which patients we are overtreating.
Right. So according to their signature, the polar high risk, of course, benefit from radiation therapy, and not the ones which are low risk. So, and the thing is, in this, when they were looking at this signature, these were patients who did not undergo any systemic treatment. Possibly systemic treatment would have made the results even better. Okay. Now we come to our often thrashed bit, which is the internal mammary node. I think the discussions is like, just keeps happening all the time. And I don't think that the results have been any different. So your take on, I want to understand from you, the radiation oncologist, what constitutes, does internal mammary always be a part of your local regional RNI in patients who are node positive? Does it form a part of your RNI at all times, or do you reserve it for a specific subset of patients?
In fact, as of I'm concerned, any node positive, especially when there is greater than 4 nodes positive in the axilla, and there is an extracapsular extension, and medial and inner quadrant tumors, I usually include the internal mammary nodes.
Is that the case with everybody else? Because this is that subgroup they have teased out. I don't think they've told us anything new.
I'd like to, kind of go back in history when we were doing the 2D planning. We would irradiate all women post-mastectomy with an IMN irradiation field. And then came the data that these patients are at a higher risk of developing cardiac toxicity, and that fell by the wayside. But if we see historically again the data from the MD Anderson, which states that the women who have a high axillary lymph node burden, and especially if there's extracapsular spread, then they have a higher risk, or the patients with the central quadrant and medial quadrant tumors, they are at a high risk of developing the internal mammary lymph node chain metastasis. And now we have the PET scans, which can pick these up, and the patients are undergoing neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And there is also a study which you kind of presented where neoadjuvant chemoradiation also has been given. So in such times, I think it would be very difficult to justify that all patients would be irradiated for the IMN. So we'll have to select the subset of patients who are really at a very high risk, maybe more than 10 lymph nodes, and the ones with the extracapsular spread, or the ones who had upfront supraclavicular lymph nodes with a large T4 disease. So those are the subsets that come to my mind who would benefit from getting the internal mammary radiation.
Right. Yes, Dr. Prasanjit.
Of internal mammary radiation as a whole for all patients is actually a misnomer. Certainly with that, the central and medial group tumors did certainly better. The disease-free survival improvement was there by a modest 10%. So it has to be looked with a caution. And the limitation of this particular study was number of patients was certainly very insufficient to detect the small difference in disease-free survival, actually attributed to more efficient systemic treatment which were given. And second, follow-up period was also not very long.
Okay, I don't think we'll get too much of time to discuss all the abstracts that I was given, but let me just put one which will interest both the surgical oncologists and the radiation oncologists, and that is metastatectomy versus radiation in de novo metastatic breast cancer. Bone, brain, liver, lung, and metastasis involving more than one site is what the 5 subgroups were. And here, the surgeons seem to be scoring, but the real truth is that by and large, we'll end up treating them with radiation. So surgeons first and then the radiation oncologists. So what is the practice, Shalaka?
I have a thing here. If it's bone met, it's definitely going to go for radiation. Whose surgeon is resecting a bony met?
So they have talked about a resection of a sternal met. So I was also looking for it specifically in that in the body of this. This.
We do consider resection of, and if it's a solitary one and etc.
No ways.
If you see the data, they have resected much less of bones only.
Yes, lung and liver.
Than lung and liver, or even brain. And as Dr. Shalaka rightly said, most of the bone mets would be better treated probably with radiation because surgical morbidity may be higher.
But I'm sure our radiation oncologists will have a different take on the liver or the lung met now with better technology in their armamentarium. Yes, please go for it.
What about a contralateral axillary node?
Sorry?
What about a contralateral axillary lymph node? If that is proven metastasis.
No, that has to be treated surgically, Shalaka. That is something we're not going to give the radiation oncologist. But yes. But with SBRT, yes. And sometimes you get very unpleasant surprises. So we recently had a patient who had a lung met, a solitary lung met. She was on systemic treatment, responded well, 6 millimeter solitary lung nodule, insisted on metastatectomy for the lung. And when you open, you find that there are pleural nodules. So, there are a lot of things that I don't know. I'm not saying that, we have caught the disease, so we now know that she's pretty badly off. But the thing is, had we caught this 3 months later, possibly she would have lived those 3 months better than what she would land up living after 3 months. Just my thought, my random thought. So radiation oncologist, your thoughts.
Geeta, I would just like that we need to conclude. So I'll ask one of the radiation oncologists to sum up this paper and then call for closure of the panel. We are overshooting the time, please.
Yes, thank you.
So this study has all the limitations of a retrospective analysis, and there is a lot of data which is not even clear, and there is missing data in the analysis as well. I think this is an issue which needs to be individualized for patients, and we cannot really generalize on which is a better approach because we don't know number of metastases and number of sites, and so much of data is missing in this that we cannot really conclude anything on the basis of this. That's my take.
Right. Okay, so I think we will.
Thank you, Dr. Geeta, for conducting this panel very, exhaustively, as well as trying to cover a lot of abstracts. It was a tall task given to you, and you've done the justice to it. And I'm grateful to all the panelists also for joining in, and Dr. Buddhi Singh, who's my co-chair. So we started off with the radiology and discussed and debated about the merits and demerits of sentinel lymph node biopsy, ALND versus no ALND versus no sentinel lymph node biopsy versus radiation, short course, long course, and then the gene signature, whether no radiation at all needs to be given. So like Geeta very aptly said, that probably the surgeons and the radiation oncologists are going to go out of the window for the breast cancer management in future, but maybe not. So we'll wait and watch. And then there was this exciting closure on the debate about the SBRT versus metastatectomy, which is probably going to continue to be there because the oligometastatic disease is still going to be the norm after chemotherapy. And once again, on behalf of Dr. Buddhi Singh, my co-chair, the professor from PGI, and the whole panel, and Dr. Geeta, I'd like to thank Dr. Sudeep and Dr. Shona Nag for giving us this time. Good day to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thank